On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder have sent plenty to the Olympics. How's that going? Plus, are there any holes on this roster that we can identify right now?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member, and Inside the Thunder beat writer, Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, we're joined by Joel Lorenzi of the Oklahoman at JX Lorenzi on Twitter. Joel, how you doing this summer?
What's cracking, man? It's been a minute. Why you never want me on the pod? I don't know why. I think we got good chemistry.
We do. And if the people out there saw the amount of texts that I've sent, you know, the blue iMessage text, it's blue.
Oh, please.
Not a single gray message back.
But you know what the blue says? The blue is like Darius Baisley. OMG. Did you see what Darius did? That's all it is. It's never about a pod. It's about miscellaneous, your random miscellaneous thoughts. It's never about the pod.
Hey, I've offered the pod many a time. Man, hopefully we'll have a lot more of these pods as the season gets underway. But this summer check-in, Joel, we've been waking up early at times. The Josh Giddey SGA game was at 6:30 in the morning. How have you seen the Olympics play out? Let's start with SGA. Is there anything about his game that has really stuck with you?
I don't know that it's fully materialized yet, but going into it, I knew I think, and I don't know, this is going to be some giant leap, but I know he's talked about, especially in these past 2 years, about advancing as an off-ball player. Last year, he definitely didn't really have it. I mean, J-Dub is great as a secondary creator, but it was all Shai getting downhill last year. I mean, that's obviously the base of their offense. He's one of the best players in the world. So I don't know that he had a grand opportunity to do that, but, like, regardless of him being the best player on Canada, like, RJ is going to get downhill. Dylan Brooks is Dylan Brooks. He's going to take whatever shot he wants at whatever time. And so there are, like, more times, more scenarios, more situations where Shai is playing off ball. So I think the opportunity's been there. And I think he's improved marginally there. I don't know that he's taking some big leap. We got the whole Olympic field to wait and see what happens there. But I'll say, like, especially last game, when he's, like, more so – I thought in the first game they really called on him more to really take over the game down the stretch. But last game, I mean, he's picking the spots more carefully. I don't know that he's, like, a killer moving off the ball, but, like, you knew, like, okay, there might be a possession or two where he's not involved in the action, but when he does catch the ball, it feels like, okay, like this is the possession, like, and he's getting to a spot real quick, not wasting any movement, it felt like. So I feel like he's getting better at not that he maybe struggled with, you know, if he's off the ball for a stretch, you know, getting to his spots when he gets it back. But he's, like, especially doing that, I think, efficiently, fluidly. Like, that's what I saw last game, I think.
Yeah, I think that he gets to his spots at will. And that's what we saw him do in the NBA as well. Being a better facilitator, I think, has stuck out a little bit. Just kind of creating advantages more so than just taking the next pass. I think that's a big leap from him. But otherwise, it's kind of just been Shai being Shai. And I think that this grand stage, the only real takeaway I've had, and I wrote about this at SI, I do think that he's a good MVP bet this year. I think that you're going to see voter fatigue with Jokic. We typically, you know, the voters typically go back and hand people awards. Shai's obviously going to have the stats to back it up and warrant the award. The Thunder are going to be, you know, a high-level regular season team. I think it's between, you know, him and Doncic and Embiid. I don't think that either of those two guys are going to play enough in the regular season to warrant MVP, and like the voters will hold that against Doncic. I think Philadelphia would be wise to just simply almost not let Embiid qualify for the award to kind of get to their end goal of a healthy Embiid in April. So I think that he's a really good bet for the MVP because you're seeing right now the narrative already, the conversation already changed. You know, there's been more people, even Dwayne Wade on these Olympic broadcasts called him, you know, the rightful MVP last year. And that's kind of been a growing sentiment since the award was handed out. And I do think that voters, and I'm not sure if you're going to, you know, pick your ballot back up this year or not, but I do think that voters like really care about the narratives and the storylines. And can we really give this guy 4 MVPs? Can we really give this guy, you know, this kind of historic stretch? even if Jokic does deserve it, which his numbers will bear out that he does deserve it, obviously. But I do think that this will be Shai's season.
Yeah, you made a couple really good points. I do think, first of all, coming into the season, like the overarching thing, besides the points you made, were that this team is probably the favorite for the West. That's been like bottom line criteria is you being a successful team like since the beginning of time. I mean, I know there are maybe like an anomaly or two that even Doncic caught some speed last year at the end of last year's race, even though Dallas wasn't a top 3 seed. I do think I don't know that Shai's like an advanced stats darling like Jokic or something like that. I think the advanced stats like him, maybe not love him like Jokic. But like last year's stat line, what was it, 30, 31, 6 and 5? Like,
yep,
that wins you MVP pretty much any year. And so you made a good point about availability. That's such a thing. I don't know that that's going to change. That criteria is going to change, even with people being disgruntled about it. I don't know that it's going to change anytime soon. And of this, core group, Shai's at the top in terms of availability, especially when you're looking at a guy like Embiid. There's just so much unpredictability there and so much uncertainty. And so, like, all the signs are pointing to Shai at least getting one MVP in these next few years, just with how well positioned this team is, how much he has to do with that, because you saw, I mean, it was a very small sample, but you saw what that team looked like when he wasn't playing. I mean, he's the complete heart engine. I mean, there are star players who will probably be top 10 in the MVP ballot who they come out and maybe, I don't know, maybe like a Paul George or something. I don't know. We're going toward more 10 to 15 best players in the league range, but like there are players where they can come out and a team's complexion isn't that drastically different. And again, all praise to the leaps J-Dub has made as a creator, but the Thunder's offense did not look remotely the same when Shai wasn't playing. And so that's something you have to factor in too, just how much he has to do with what may be to come.
And voters would rather typically be late than early. And so, like you saw last year, they hardly casted any votes to anyone not named Jokic. I don't think that that'll be the same case next season. I think that, to be clear, this is not going to be some runaway. I think that Jokic will have a case. I think Doncic will have a case. I think Embiid will have a case, barring, of course, the game's played markers. But I think at the end of the day, you're kind of seeing the shift around how Shai is talked about, nationally, with people who do have like influence in these votes. And then you couple that with Shai's on the biggest stage he's ever been on right now in the Olympics, fresh off of being in the second round of the NBA playoffs. He's going to go up against Team USA, I believe. I think that they're going to get all the way there and play Team USA. What happens in that game, who knows? But Shai's going to play well. They might not win, but Shai's going to play really well. And then 2 months later, the Thunder will have the most national TV games they've had since Kevin Durant was in town. And so, like, you'll be in the face of voters the most to make up for, like you mentioned, the lack of the advanced analytics, which is what people kind of base their votes on nowadays. Yeah, Shai's going to get beat in some of those categories, but he's going to be in your face. He's going to put up the counting stats and get all those kind of votes. He's going to be the top team in the West. He's going to have all these things going his way. That I think that right now he's sitting at third in MVP odds on FanDuel. I would head over there if you're someone who likes to bet on futures. I think it's a good bet.
Yeah, and you know what? I think with Jokic, because and this is something to watch for next year too. We have to. I would bet. I'm not a betting man. I would bet that next year's race isn't as nuanced as this past year's was, just in terms of how many guys had a different case. Maybe not as strong as others, but like even like Brunson, you could argue was on the ballot and had a legit, maybe not a legit case to win, but a legit case to be in a run. And Tatum was another guy, because the Celtics were so overwhelmingly good. I think most people argued because they, everybody knows the arguments with Tatum, but I don't think next year's race is going to be that nuanced. I think you're maybe looking at 2-3 guys that are like really convincing, maybe really 2, and then you have to wonder who's getting disqualified by then, like we kind of talked about. And so there's just a threshold I think that Shai has to get to where he becomes a safe pick, because if the Thunder is as a team as sound and as accomplished by the end of the year as we think they will be, Shai's part in that won't be up for debate. It's not like a Tatum. It's not like anything like that. His part in that won't be up for debate. And also, I don't know. I just think like last year, like I mentioned, the nuances in the race made it so that Jokic was, I guess, a safe pick for a lot of people who didn't want to really dive into the vote. I thought that was maybe last year was a very scary year to vote. And so I think that's why people went the safe pick route. But I think there's so many things that point to, Shai, maybe not a runaway case, but a case where it's like, okay, there's almost too many arguments. And you're right. There are underlying with voters, there are underlying, carryover. There's some lingering effects from the past 2-3 races. Like there's a built-up history there that people won't list in their reasoning, but it will be understood by most people. And I think now, like you said, people want to get on the Shai train. That's just something. I mean, last year, like I said, the case he made was a case that pretty much 98% of MVP races that wins you the award.
Yeah, and it was just kind of, I think, too scary to jump out on that limb and go away from Jokic a season after you kind of regretted. Most voters said that they regretted voting for Embiid over Jokic. It just all was the worst possible storm for Shai. I think they get him back this season because he's one of the most predictable guys. You feel good. If you are going to go place a bet, you feel good he's going to play. You feel good he's going to dominate. You feel good he's going to be a top team in the West. You feel good he's going to be one of the best teams in basketball. You feel good that the voters are going to split hairs between Brown and Tatum, who'll be the best team in the NBA, and that will kind of cast them aside. You feel good that voters have not valued Doncic historically the way that they should. And so you feel good that Jokic will probably not get his 4th MVP in 5 years. And so he's a really, really good bet, I think, for MVP. But coming up, let's talk about the rest of the Olympics. Plus, what are the expectations for the Thunder? And let's try to find some holes on the team right now that looks nearly perfect. But first, Joel, I have to tell you about our good friends over at GameTime, because I'd be a bad friend if I didn't, Joel, because you should be using GameTime. If you're going out on the town, if you're going to go to an event, concert, movie, comedy show, minor league baseball, you can get your tickets at GameTime. And when you do, you get, number one, first and foremost, last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. It's the best price out there for you. You can also get flash deals and zone deals. But I love 2 features even more than that. Although I love saving money, I also love the all-in pricing. So the price you see before you go to checkout is the exact price you're going to pay, and the view from your seat. Because, Joel, you're not an Oklahoman, even though you write for them. You might not know what the sight lines are like at some of these venues. And so you can see them and our good friends over at GameTime. Go there right now. Download the GameTime app, create your account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create your account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase at GameTime. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. As part of the network, as fall camps open up, we also have Locked On Sooners, Locked On Pokes. Go check those out for your football coverage. Joel Lorenzi from the Oklahoman joining us at JX Lorenzi on Twitter. Joel, not much to discuss, in my opinion, about the rest of the Olympics in terms of like Lou Dort. He looks status quo, which I think is a great thing for OKC, that he's not kind of being asked to do too much and falling into bad habits. And then from a Josh Giddey perspective, that conversation is very interesting. We dove into it yesterday on the show, but if you want to give your thoughts, you can. I just think that we're seeing exactly what we expected to see. When given the ball in his hands, he's a really good player. You had no avenue to do that in Oklahoma City with him, especially after he rejects a bench role. And so it is what it is.
That's exactly right. And hindsight is 2020, man. And people want to add to this club of like old players who left the Thunder and took off. Like, it's like people got to put this stuff into context, man. People hate context, but you're completely right. And I do think like I mean, some of the stuff Giddey was doing in that game was like the game against Canada was laughable. I mean, like off the dribble, ISO, step back threes, like, I mean, bro, he's not gonna do that stuff in Chicago. Like, he's gonna fully be like back on the ball. I think he's probably gonna have the chance to thrive in Chicago. But like even some of the stuff people are getting mad about from that game, like he's not doing that. Like in the course of a NBA game, like they're not gonna ask him to shoot step backs and I mean he'll probably spot up off like relocation or something like that or whatever. But like I don't know how many off dribble threes, at least the off dribble threes he was taking in that game, that he's gonna be shooting in Chicago. Maybe they push for him to shoot more threes, but I don't know if they'll look like that. So the stuff people are getting mad about, like he was never gonna shoot a sidestep and in OKC. If nothing else would have got him benched, that probably should have if he ever tried that in OKC. So people will have no reason to really be mad. I mean, it's fun to see him try some of this stuff, but context matters.
Context does matter, and the context within that game showed exactly what the disconnect was. Number one, like we mentioned at the top, you can't get him on the ball in OKC. You just can't do it. Number two, whenever they did give him his designed role in a must-win game, he faltered down the stretch, which is okay for a 21-year-old. That there's no shame in that. But this is a championship-level ball club, and then you have to just realize that the timing was not right. I think that Josh Giddey will have a great career. I think he'll be awesome in Chicago with the guard whisperer Billy Donovan. But he was never going to work out in Oklahoma City, and you could not have possibly gotten better value and a better value plus fit for your team after the worst year of his career than Alex Caruso. And so it continues to be a win-win. And like you mentioned, it's August, so we have nothing to talk about, and we just have to kind of rehash that conversation all the time. But sometimes you don't have to do anything other than just be logical. And the logical answer is Josh is going to have fun. Josh is going to be a good player. The Thunder are going to be awesome with Alex Caruso, which brings us to our next topic. How do you set expectations for a team that is the favorite in Vegas to win the West? Every pundit, nationally, locally, is picking the Thunder to win the West and be one of the best teams in basketball. Your colleague, Joe Mazzato in the Oklahoman, is taking the over on their win total. Like, this team, without question, is being projected as the best in basketball, stands Boston. And it's very hard to repeat. So what does that mean for what can be deemed a successful season? Because it's not as easy as it was 2 years ago where, golly gee, they made the play-in. This is unbelievable. Or last year where they go on this massive ride in that first year expecting just be in the top 6 and they get number 1. How do you gauge what to do in this season?
Yeah, I still, as much as they, like, people will say they have this window, they do have a certain window. I think a finals appearance is probably what you rest your head on. Like, even if they don't win finals, because we are still talking about Boston. Yeah, like I know it's difficult to repeat. But like if without knowing the East race, if it is OKC and Boston, I'd probably pick Boston. And so I think based on their trajectory, even if people feel this pressurized window, I think the finals appearance is what you should be expecting because they got all the tools. I mean, if you're looking at the teams that are standing in their way, like let's say, like I thought Dallas made some great moves this summer, and that was obviously the team that outplayed them in the second round. I thought simply swapping out Giddey for Caruso was enough to maybe something that would have pushed them over the edge in a repeat matchup. But now you're talking about Hardenstein, the lineup versatility he brings, a leap from Dub and Chet. Those are two that were dependent on in their series and didn't come through. Like you're talking about the additions and time that probably alone would make them better than Dallas in a postseason setting, especially now that they have a couple series under their belt as a unit during this iteration of the Thunder. So if that's who's standing in their way, I mean, I know Dallas punched above their weight probably through that run, but like I'm trying to think of the teams. Denver is like eating away at their window. I mean, Jokic is still the best player in any series in that conference, but like how much can we really bet on Jokic versus the lineup versatility OKC has? Maybe if we're looking at the Timberwolves, you can make some arguments there. But like I would, like there's a good chance you could argue for OKC in pretty much any of these matchups. So I think finals berth is what people should be counting on. I don't know about a championship, especially not this year, but finals berth, I think that's fair expectations, no?
So I think that this is going to be our favorite word of the day. It's context. I think that when you look at this season, let's talk. I think it's going to be a sliding glass door pretty much. How do you get to a successful year? Well, if you miss the playoffs entirely, that is just an unbelievable failure. If you make the play-in tournament, it's an unbelievable failure. If you don't get home court, it's an unbelievable failure. If you lose in the first round, it's an unbelievable failure. If you lose competitively in the second round, with how tough we think the West is, and we both agree that Memphis is one of these just scorpions in the grass, you just cannot take them lightly. If you have a really competitive second-round series, and J-Dub and Chet just aren't there yet, I think that that's disappointing. I think that that is incredibly disappointing. Mm-hmm. Is it a failure? I don't think so. I think if you get the Western Conference Finals, and the same thing happens, it's competitive, it's close, and you lose. Disappointing, sure. I think it's kind of an average outcome. I think if you simulate this season on NBA 2K, more often than not, this team is going to end up in the conference finals. So it's tough to not deem that a success. If you make the finals, no matter the outcome, it is a wild success. The thing I think people might not be ready for is that we just went through the whole season of outcomes. The only way you get that feeling of a wild success is by making the NBA finals, which 2 teams do every year. It's incredibly hard. So the vast majority of you listening to the show will come away with this season a little bit disappointed if they're not one of those top 2 teams. But I think that the context matters of like, is it a disaster? Is it a failure? The only way it's that is if it ends quickly in the second round or prior. Past that, it's going to take context. Well, we won't know until after exit interviews if it was a successful year or not. Past first round or less, and getting bounced like it did against Dallas. You got bounced in game 6. I know the point differential stuff. The bottom line is the better team on the floor was Dallas. And they were that the whole series. They were the more prepared. They were the more physical. They were the more just everything on that series. If that repeat happens, it is disappointing to not see, because it's going to come down to Chet and Jada, not see them take a step forward. But the good news is the disappointing outcomes and the disastrous outcomes have like a 0.1% chance of happening without an explanation for it. Because I think that the only way that the disastrous outcomes happen is if you have a lot of injuries. And you can't project that. You don't know if it's going to happen or not. And it doesn't really matter if those things happen in the sense of like, yeah, of course your expectations change. The bad news is you're at a point now where everything's under a microscope and you don't really have that feeling of just butterflies and happiness anymore unless you climb that mountain, which is the hardest thing to do in sports.
Yeah. Okay. So let me put my words in context. Let me rephrase. I think a finals berth, I think that's a complete, I would not be surprised if that's most people's expectations. I think it should be. I think even
that's how good this team is. Like they can win the NBA championship for sure.
And even with as much parity as there is in this conference, like things come down so much to matchups and like you said, injuries, things like that. I'm willing to bet that only so many matchups really even cause, like I don't think for OKC's path, I don't think it's so matchup dependent as it was a year ago. I thought last year it could have been really matchup dependent. Dallas was one of those matchups because they were on a heater, punching above their weight. Obviously, they went to the finals. I think they're more resistant to the kind of matchup thing going into this next year, assuming the players make leaps. I will say this reality you painted where second round, the Dallas series repeats itself in another Dallas rematch. I wouldn't call that a failure, but I would emphasize disappointing just because of what it probably means, and it probably means either they've created more flaws that weren't there a year ago, or like you said, Dub and Chet didn't take that leap, which I think would be fair for anybody to say that's vastly disappointing, especially if you're looking through the lens of, well, they have this window before these guys get paid. Of course, they want to win now to a degree. They wouldn't have made those moves otherwise. And so if these guys aren't at least better to the point where, let's say they're putting Chet in the short roll more. We talked about this at the start of the summer, like putting him in advantageous positions. He's not a better defender. Maybe he's not the shooter he needs to be. That's a problem. Or if Dub isn't making the reads he needs to be as an on ball pick and roll guy, that's probably a problem. And so I wouldn't call it a failure, but if they lose the same way second round, even if it is competitive, I think that's vastly disappointing. I think the floor for them, injuries aside, it should be, I think the fair expectation should be conference finals.
Yeah, and it is fair. The Thunder have done a phenomenal job of trying to avoid that variance, trying to avoid things like shot variance, lineup variance, like you said, matchup variance, going into that lineup variance, because they can play nearly every single style. Now, as we said all year last year, there is no perfect team. Like that can't be my retort. I don't know about you, but it was my retort to like the whole big man issue that even Boston's not perfect. As of right now, this Thunder team looks as close to perfect as you can get, but there inevitably is going to be some flaws on it. We're going to try to figure out what those are coming up. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a 24/7 streaming channel of all the latest news around sports. And right now, we're joined by Joel Lorenzi of the Oklahoman Thunder beat writer at JX Lorenzi. Joel, I think that this team, and who knows what they're going to lay out preseason as media days around the corner and everything, just looking at what they've done, you mentioned it before the break. This team is in win now mode. They've made win now moves. They've done everything possible to win right now. With that being said, it comes down to Chet and J-Dub. And you can say that's a lot of pressure. I don't think that those two guys are afraid of the pressure. I don't think that this organization's afraid of that pressure, because this is what the sport is. It's a star-driven league, and they believe those two guys are stars. When those two guys take that leap, because knowing the work ethic that we both know, seeing it, and seeing the projections that they're on and the trajectory that they're on, if we both think that they're going to make that leap, what I think the Thunder have done best beyond anything else is being proactive and not reactive. I think this summer was a win now move, but not necessarily in the same context as everything else is. It was a win now move because if we're all betting that Chet and J-Dub will be superstars and they'll be these all-stars, whatever tagline you want to put on them, they'll be 16-game players alongside Shai, one of the best in the sport. If we all believe that, then what you should do is give them the tools for when they're ready and not wait until they're ready. And then the next offseason, after a quote-unquote wasted year of like trying to see if they're ready, then going out and making your big moves. So I think what the Thunder have done is that they've prepared themselves for those guys to take a leap. And it might not happen this year, and you're waiting on next year and the year after. But the second that that leap happens for those two guys, the second that it clicks with them of how to play in the postseason, how to play championship level basketball, this Thunder team is a championship team. It's a championship core. It's a championship coaching staff. It's a championship rotation. It's a championship depth team. It's a championship team. And it just comes down to if those two guys take a leap forward. And with that being said, as of this moment, we mentioned how everyone's projecting and what they're projecting the Thunder to do, including Joe Mazzato, who's really level-headed. I keep using him as an example because this is a guy that's incredibly level, and for him to take the over on the Thunder win total is just a testament to how good people think this Thunder team is going to be. Right now, it's hard to find the flaws because how do you beat this team? If you go big, they can now match you big, or they can just play you off the floor small like they did last year, or something in between. They have the shooters to keep up. They have the go-to guy, preferably have a couple go-to guys. You know, if those leaps happen, they have the best defense in the sport. They have a top 5 offense last year, which projects to get better, or at least not as laboring as it was, because people will throw around the plus minus for the starting 5 to defend Giddey. If you actually have the eye test, they labored to get there. This will be a more seamless way to get there. So with that being said, what will we look back on as we talk now about them being a perfect team and say, oh yeah, that was one of their things that they have to address?
Yeah, okay, based on all that, I think it would be easier to phrase this as like imperfections and maybe like risks instead of flaws. I think right. What comes to my head first, as we're talking about lineup versatility, like I think that traditional modern for missing that, and in place, calling on J-Dub, which J-Dub is pretty capable of playing that 4 spot as long as they want him to, I suppose, because he's matched, taller matchups. He's defended smaller. Like he can do a lot. The wingspan allows him to do a lot. His general skill set allows him to do a lot. But is he in the perfect position to be maximized that way? Like, is there a more modern, I guess, what we're used to seeing at the 4 that could beat her? I mean, obviously, I don't know that it's going to be Ousmane Deng. That's what people are maybe betting or hoping. I guess could be that, but it doesn't look promising right now. I think like a Jarris Walker type, who Indy probably isn't coming off of, but just that mold of player, not having that, like if you did have that player that is more lineup versatility, you are calling on Dub to do more. You are, I guess, questioning what that means for his maximization, his leap. That's all I'd say on that front is the big forward spot. And then there are other flaws. Did you want to go tit for tat? Did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, we can go back and forth with this, and I think that it was a good reminder of like the Thunder have all these expectations for a reason. They are literally the closest thing to a perfect team in August as you can be, them in Boston. And I don't think that any of these will be sinkable offenses. Like, I don't think that because of this, they will lose in this round.
Right.
We already mentioned how they lose. I think it's because, if they do, it's because those two guys were not ready yet, which is going to be fine if that's the case because they're so young. I wonder about the playmaking aspect of things because we both watched in Dallas that the Thunder, even while still owning Josh Giddey, possessing him on the roster, they lacked some of that creation to make life easier for themselves. They, look at it in the draft with Topic, Mitchell, and Jones, all varying degrees of playmakers, but Topic not a factor this season. I think that they can recreate playmaking by the moves that they've made. I think that Caruso's a better playmaker than people might think, but if you're using him in the starting five, how does that help your secondary unit? You can hope that Chet takes that leap, as Sam Presti mentioned. You can hope that Kaysen taps into his point guard background. You can hope that Isaiah Hartenstein and Jay will create that in the front court. But it's not just an in-your-face answer for how they alleviate some of the playmaking concerns from Dallas that led Sam Presti to discussing this offseason about how in the playoffs you win with the pass. I think that they've done a lot in that area, but does it just smack you in the face that they've fixed that issue?
Yeah, okay, so this was on my list too, because I think this is one of the risks. Like obviously it goes with, it's only risky if your hope is to win the championship this year, which I imagine is their goal. But there's a big dependence on, like you said, Kaysen taking that leap, on Chet taking some sort of leap as a playmaker, on Dub being able to run an offense, maybe not the way Shai can, but differently than he did in the Dallas series. And so there's a real dependence there, especially because Presti clearly wanted Giddey back to play that sort of backup point guard role. And now that he won't be, you're leaning more, I imagine, into Dub being that. If he doesn't take the leap, are you playing Kaysen alongside him and hoping he takes the leap? Are you then taking reps away from Dub if they're playing side by side? How are you evenly distributing those? You mentioned Caruso. If Caruso, I imagine Caruso will be in the default starting lineup alongside Dort with Chet at the 5. I think, Caruso, I think, Caruso guards up, he defends taller. I can appreciate that lineup, but at the same time, depending on what you want to do with that second unit, Caruso is a better fit for the second unit than Dort is, depending on the way you want to stagger those lineups. I would say that is in part because Caruso ran infinitely more pick and roll than Dort did last year as a ball handler. And so that's something to factor in. But then if you're playing Caruso as a secondary playmaker in this second unit, whose reps are you taking away? Dub? Is Kaysen even on the ball then at that point? What is Caruso's role in this and these guys taking a leap? And how much are you depending on these guys taking a leap? I think in a perfect world, that second unit, has Dub running the show, has Kaysen as a secondary, has Isaiah Joe in there, and then has Isaiah Hartenstein doing his thing. I think that lineup could be potentially harmonious, dude. I think the 3-man lineup of Dub, Joe, and Hart is gonna do damage just off the way they can play off each other. But if Kaysen makes that leap, which it feels like they're dependent on, and Presti has talked about those guys taking the leap, they could be dangerous. But then what if not? Because there is no real backup point guard. Like you said, Topic is out the picture. They want to get him to play that role. He's not. So there's a real dependence on some of these guys taking those leaps.
So with Kaysen, it's interesting because, the organization's admitted that, I think it was Mark that said this during the season, that, unlike other rookies in the past, he meant so much to them that they could not put him in the G League and have him develop on the ball. So that developmental situation for him was always going to come this summer, no matter what. So once he made himself indispensable to the Thunder. So, that is a thing that they're banking on. I wonder, and this could just be way too simplified and not at all what happens, but I do wonder, does Caruso literally just replace Giddey in every sense of the word? In the sense of, in the first quarter, you start him in place of Giddey and the rest is the same. And then midway through the first quarter, just like they did last year, taking off Giddey, Dub, and Chet, you take off Caruso, Dub, and Chet. That way Dort's not playing on his lonesome, so to say, because we've seen Lou Dort, frankly, not be good whenever he's left to his own devices and able to do more offensively. And Mark's talked about that as well. So I don't think that's groundbreaking news. So do you literally just replicate your rotation from last year with the upgrades being Caruso is a better is a better secondary creator than Giddey was. You can yell and scream in the comments about how great Giddey's playmaking is, and it is. He cannot playmake in that way of playmaking off of Shai, playmaking off of J-Dub, the way Caruso can. So the upgrades would be your secondary unit now has Caruso in place of Giddey and iHeart in place of J-Will, which puts J-Will to your third big, which makes him a really good third big, but not as good of a second big as we saw last year. So they're probably not going to do that. Mark's probably cooking up some master plan, I'm sure. But it is interesting that they had this recipe for success in the sense of like staggering these lineups to create playmaking, and now you've got a better option at that specific playmaking role. While he's not the one-to-one playmaker Giddey is, Giddey's a more talented passer. Giddey's a more talented on-ball guy. He is a better playmaker for the roll off of J-Dub.
So he's not going to be Slob Russo? That's what you're telling me right now?
I have to imagine he won't be, but someone's got to slob.
Someone has to. That's a very trivial wrinkle here, but there's a huge drop-off there in terms of the out-of-bounds plays, the after-timeout plays, just the execution there. I imagine they'll figure it out. That's a trivial part, but it's something to think about. The last thing I'll add on in terms of the dependence on some of these guys making those playmaking leaps is like a world without Shai. Like if Shai goes down, like it's a dystopia. I mean, it would be great reps for these guys, but like we saw what they looked like when he was out last year. I think they've added players that can kind of alleviate some of that stuff, but then you're really depending on those guys to take that leap. Like I think so much of this is dependent on Shai's availability too. Like that's something to consider. But you're right with Caruso in that role. I think like you said, while he's not one-to-one playmaker Giddey is, it's the fact that he's probably gonna not only embrace that role better than Giddey did, but he'll just be he's played that role for more seasons. I mean, he's played off of great players as an off-ball, hybrid guy his whole career. That's how he's made a living. He played with LeBron James. Like there's gonna be a niche for him in the field. I think would look better than Giddey's did for sure.
I'm gonna predict a topic across Thunder platforms, social media, podcasts, articles, whatever. After a month of the season, either people will be saying, we'll see, Mark's not that good at slob plays because he doesn't have Josh Giddey. Giddey made those plays, or they'll be just as good, if not better, and people will say, Mark was the real slob wizard after all. And that'll be a Joe Lorenzi column in the Oklahoman coming to you about November. So I'm interested to see how that pans out. Either way, though, there'll be some humongous takes. We'll see who the next slobber is. Obviously, your dog is a slobber.
Christ. We can't start calling it that. There's only so many variations of this thing we could do. Slobber is not one of them.
Slobbers and blobbers is what we are on the Locked On Thunder podcast. Joel, just to end on a more upbeat note, I think this is why you might see the Thunder head into the season with this open roster spot, which, if you want to cut down the roster, is technically 2 open spots right now because Topic takes up one that you just cannot play him. So even though they're shorthanded at the front end of the season, I do think that they might take it into the year because either the playmaking concerns or needing a forward will be something that you want to address at the deadline or the buyout market, and you have these ample picks to do so, or another issue will pop up that we're not even dreaming of right now, and you want to address that too. So it's just an easier way to address things at the deadline if you have that open roster spot, when right now it's tough to project because what if you're wrong, right? Like what if you say, okay, we've got to fill this last roster spot and playmaking is our biggest issue. And it really, they've done all these things we just talked about to address playmaking that ends up working to a T, or you go after a forward that just can't fill the role that you expect them to. So I think that kind of they're allowing themselves probably to get more data on what they actually do need before they fill this spot, or maybe they just fill it tomorrow and we look like idiots.
Yeah, I'd rather not look like an idiot, but yeah, I think that is more likely the open possibilities instead of like the loyalty route they usually take. Like I don't think they're gonna like. It's not gonna be Keontae Johnson or something. I don't think. Like I think there are possibilities, like you say. I guarantee. If I had to bet, it's something that we're not even thinking of. I mean, we're only blobbers here, so we only know so much. I mean, so.
Hey, better to blob than to slob, I always say. But Joel,
absolutely.
Well, there are a few slobbers on the beat, but we won't get into that. Joel, it's been a pleasure having you. I'm interested to see if the Thunder do have a slobber on a roster. I'm also interested to see how this season unfolds, what plateaus that they reach and mountains they climb. Let them know where they can find all your stuff as we slowly get ready for the season.
They can find me at Oklahoman.com, where I usually am. You know what it is. I'll still have some stories, some thoughtful stories coming next month or so. This is my first off season, man. I didn't realize it was this grim. I mean, the days are so dry in between the Olympics, man. And if the Olympics weren't here, I don't know what I'd be doing, Rylan.
A whole lot of nothing in your case. Meanwhile, we're potting here on Lockdown Thunder after you've dodged just for a month. You've dodged just since before Summer League, Joel, and I can pull those receipts. But I'm glad you finally.
Bro, to be fair, I told you I left my mic back home in Chicago. I wanted to give this pod the best quality because to me, it is my favorite pod on the beat, and it's my favorite to be a part of. And so I just wanted to give you the best quality. You see, I got the AirPods in now. That's whatever. Like I don't know how good the quality is, but you know what? I said enough is enough. I have to join my boy, but don't act like you were like pleading for me to come on the pod like this. You got to give that gimmick up.
I was close.
That's real slobber behavior.
I was close to slobbering to get you on the pod, but Joel, it's been awesome. Again, I hope to do this frequently now that you've finally gotten back on the pod. Until next time, be good and be good to one another.